Throughout human history, death has always been seen as the end. It is an immutable law that no one can escape. However, sometimes, death is just the beginning of mysteries that last for centuries. There are figures whose lives spread terror across the world, and even when they lie down, the controversy never ceases. Today, we will talk about two of the most notorious tyrants, the fascist leader Adolf Hitler and King Henry VIII of England. History textbooks write that Hitler committed suicide in 1945, but if that is true, why did the Soviet Union, the US, and even the FBI spend tons of paper investigating his survival? Why did Nazi hunters scour South America for decades? And in a more distant era, King Henry VIII, famous for beheading his wives, was he a demon in human form, or actually just a pitiful victim of a cruel genetic disease that medicine at the time could not name? Welcome back to the channel. Sit tight, because the files we are about to open may completely change how you view history. The Sick Tyrant. Let's start by going back in time to the 1940s. The whole world was engulfed in the flames of World War II. While millions of soldiers were falling on the front lines, another war, silent but equally fierce, was taking place in the shadows, the war of intelligence agencies. In that stifling atmosphere, MI6, Britain's famous secret intelligence service, quietly collected and stored a top-secret medical file. They hid it so well that it took 15 years after the war for people to know of its existence. The center of the file is an X-ray of the skull of a 55-year-old man. The film shows something extraordinary. Its owner miraculously survived a bomb explosion at extremely close range. Shrapnel embedded in his body, eardrums perforated, but the brain still functioned. That man was none other than Adolf Hitler. This event takes us back to July 20th, 1944. That was the time of Operation Valkyrie, the most daring attempt to assassinate Hitler from within the Nazi ranks. The executor was Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg. He placed a briefcase containing a bomb right under the leg of Hitler's conference table. The pressure of the explosion tore through the wooden room, killing 4 people and injuring dozens of others. But Hitler, he was only slightly injured. A thick oak table leg had accidentally shielded him from the Reaper's scythe. After the explosion, Hitler walked out with tattered clothes, face covered in soot, but he believed fate had chosen him to continue living. However, MI6's files show a different dark corner. Although he survived, Hitler's mind began to crumble, not only affected by the explosion, but he was also a genuine drug addict. The file records in detail a list of 28 types of drugs that his personal doctor, Theodor Morell, injected into Hitler every day, from stimulants and sedatives to strange compounds extracted from animal organs. There were antidepressants so strong they could knock out a normal person, but for Hitler, they were the only thing keeping him standing and giving orders. A world leader with a brain ravaged by chemicals and paranoia. That is the naked truth about the last days of the Third Reich. The greatest deception. But what gives historians the biggest headache is not Hitler's illness, but his death. According to the official script we often hear, on April 30th, 1945, when the Soviet Red Army was only a few hundred meters from the bunker, Hitler and his new wife, Eva Braun, committed suicide. Their bodies were taken to the garden, doused with petrol, and burned. It sounds reasonable. But why was Hitler's death certificate not stamped and confirmed until December 1945, more than half a year later? And why did no one in the Allies see the body with their own eyes? Suspicion began to explode when Soviet leader Joseph Stalin himself, at the Potsdam Conference, looked straight into the eyes of US President Harry Truman and said, "I believe he is not dead. He has escaped." Stalin was not joking, because what the Soviet army found at the bunker were just unidentifiable charred bone fragments. They even suspected it could be a doppelganger, a body double for Hitler who was murdered to deceive the public. And this is where conspiracy theories become grounded. In 2014, the FBI declassified over 700 pages of documents related to the hunt for Hitler. Reports from agents showed There were witnesses who claimed to have seen a man looking exactly like Hitler in Argentina. Remember, after the war, thousands of high-ranking Nazi officers escaped to South America through rat lines. People like Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death, or Adolf Eichmann all lived peacefully in Argentina and Brazil for many years. So why couldn't Hitler, the man with the highest power, do the same? A specific hypothesis is proposed. Hitler and Eva Braun did not die in the bunker. They were taken away by a secret exit, then boarded a U-530 submarine across the ocean to Argentina. Here, they lived in seclusion at an isolated mansion at the foot of the majestic Andes Mountains, near the village of La Angostura. A quiet life until dying of old age, leaving behind a world that thought he had turned to ash. The most convincing evidence for Hitler dying in Berlin lies in a skull fragment with a bullet hole kept by Russia. They consider it a treasure, ironclad proof. But in 2009, a shock occurred. Archaeologist Nick Bellantoni from the University of Connecticut was allowed to access this bone fragment to take DNA samples. The test results were like a bucket of cold water on history. That skull fragment carried the X chromosome. It belonged to a woman, and this woman's age was only under 40. It was definitely not Hitler's. So, who was the burnt body from years ago, and where did Hitler really end his life? In a dark bunker or amidst the majestic mountains of South America? That question remains a vast void to this day. The Mad King or the victim? Goodbye to the mysteries of the 20th century. Let's go further back into the past, to 16th century England. The reign of King Henry VIII, one of the most famous and infamous kings in human history. When mentioning Henry VIII, people often think of the image of an obese, authoritarian, and brutal king, a man who had 6 wives and was willing to behead 2 of them, especially the death of Queen Anne Boleyn, the woman for whom he defied everything, even breaking away from the Roman Church to marry. But after only 3 years, that love turned into the executioner's axe. But have you ever wondered, why did a king once described in his youth as the most handsome man in Europe, an art lover, a skilled athlete, transform into such a monster in his old age? Modern historians and medical experts have posed a shocking hypothesis. Henry's cruelty was not due to his nature, but due to brain injuries and a rare genetic disease. First, let's talk about the injuries. Henry was a fan of jousting. In 1536, he had a horrific accident. A warhorse, fully clad in iron armor, fell on him, leaving the king unconscious for 2 hours. Modern neurologists believe that the collision caused severe traumatic brain injury, damaging the frontal lobe, the brain area that controls personality and emotions. That is why, after this accident, Henry's temperament changed completely. He became paranoid, quick-tempered, and depressed. But Henry's biggest tragedy lay in the issue of children. He craved a male heir, but his wives constantly miscarried, had stillbirths, or the children died young. Modern science has shed light on this tragedy and found a hidden culprit, the Kell blood group. This is an extremely rare blood group, appearing in only about 9% of white people. Researchers believe Henry carried the gene positive for the Kell antigen. The mechanism of this tragedy works as follows. When a father with Kell-positive blood has a child with a Kell-negative mother, the first child is usually safe and healthy, but during that birth, the baby's blood mixes with the mother's blood, causing the mother's body to produce antibodies against the Kell antigen. The consequence is that in subsequent pregnancies, the mother's immune system will treat the fetus as a foreign object to be destroyed. The antibodies will attack, causing severe anemia for the fetus, leading to late miscarriages in the 6th or 7th month. This matches strangely with Henry's romantic history. With Queen Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, subsequent pregnancies all ended in tragedy. Imagine Henry's pain and pressure. He knew nothing about blood types or genetics. He only saw that God was punishing him, or those wives were cursed witches. The ignorance of the era turned a biological problem into bloody death sentences. It doesn't stop there. Henry is also thought to have suffered from McLeod syndrome, a genetic disease linked to the X chromosome. This disease usually manifests in middle age, causing muscle weakness, heart disease, and especially psychiatric disorders. The image of Henry VIII in his final years, obese to the point of being unable to walk on his own, legs ulcerated and smelling, mind insane, is the typical picture of a late-stage MacLeod patient. Conclusion. History is often written by the victors, but the truth often lies hidden deep under layers of dust. Adolf Hitler, the sower of death, ultimately left a big question mark about his own death. Did he fool the world one last time and live out the rest of his life in peace? Or is it all just the imagination of conspiracy theories? Henry VIII, the Tyrant King, turned out to possibly be a victim of the very blood he carried. His brutal decisions, the deaths of his queens, all might have been different if medicine at that time had been more developed. We look back at the past not to judge, but to understand that behind the great or cruel names, they were still flesh and blood human beings, subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death, and harsh natural laws. What do you think about these hypotheses? Did Hitler really escape? And do you feel any sympathy for the tragedy of Henry VIII? Please leave your opinion in the comments section. We would love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe to the channel to join us in continuing the journey to decode the mysteries of humanity. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you in the next videos.